So crazy idea, like way crazy idea. To review, this case is hopeless. It's got big drama back there from a rod failure at some point in its history, and that little guy down there has a 6/1000 of an inch gap between the two sides, and that's game over on a case. We are putting no money into this thing. So here's the crazy idea. For bearings for this thing, we're gonna need third oversize, first. But we'll need a crank that fits inside those bearings. I'd rather not use a good crank on something like this. Good enough, but not like good. So stick with me here. Let's go over to the table of junk. Here's a crank that has been ground 10 under on the mains and 20 under on the rods. It's been used and it's a little bit under spec. Not much, 4 or 5 10/1000 of an inch or so. So it really should be ground again. Also, number 4 is a little bumpy. We're gonna polish this one up if this plan works and just go for it. As for bearings, I've got a big box of random bearings that I found. And so here is a 3rd oversize, 10 undersize that'll fit this crank, and that number 1 will fit the case. This number 3, I think it looks too nice for this, and we don't need a 3rd oversize for number 3 anyway. So we'll use this crusty number 1 and go fish. Here's a number 4. It's a little bit crusty. This will work just fine. It's 1st oversize for the case, 1st undersize for the crank. It's gonna go here. Here is a number 1 main bearing, but this is the funny thing about it. I dug through my box of number 3 main bearings and I don't have what I need. I need a 1st oversize on the case, 1st undersize on the crank for this one. But I did find this. I have a bunch of these. I'll never use all of these. But this is a number 1 main. It has the correct dimensions and it actually will slip over the main bearing bore. There's not enough room between the crank gear and the throw or the cheek or whatever you call it on the crank over here. So we'll have to throw this in the lathe and trim down those flanges, but I think that's close enough to being a number 3 main bearing once we do that, at least for this crazy project. I dug through a bunch of rod bearings and I found 2nd undersize rod bearings across 3 random sets, and here's the mismatched pair. So that'll be exciting, but these are all 50 or 0.50 millimeters, meaning 20/1000 to fit the rod journals. So we have presumably a set of rod bearings, and we'll just pick some set of rods that's not totally toasted and not ready to go either. As for the number 2 main bearing, that one's a little trickier. Let's take a look at another case. This is crusty. This is the case where I messed up when I was learning all the line boring stuff. Well, I did find a 3rd oversized number 2 main for a 1st undersized crank. I've also found a number 1 main that'll work, because everything else on this case will be 1st oversize. Same thing for number 4, 1st undersize for the crank, but I need a number 3. Samba to the rescue. I found a set of old bearings that is 1st oversize on the case, 1st undersize on the crank, nabbed it for $33, and what it'll do is supply me with a number 2 main for Wheezy and a number, what was it, number 3, is that right? Yeah, and a number 3 main bearing for the original crusty case over there. Not bad. And then I'll still have 2 bearings, the number 4 and the number 1, that can go back in the pile. So spending a little bit of money there on a case that I want to use for productive purposes, like it'll get new pistons and cylinders and new cam and that kind of thing. And we have an odd bearing out of that set that'll work for the Wheezy build. And there you have it. If we can successfully bore this case to those sizes, we have the beginnings of a when will it blow up engine. And here's what I'm thinking, just for funsies. I would like it if this engine got me 100 miles. I think there's a really big question on whether that'll actually happen or not, but that's the big question. Will it go 100 miles? So if we get to completely build this thing, I'll throw it in the car if it feels safe. We're not going to be silly about this, but it would be pretty cool to see if a bucket of beat up parts will take us at least 100 miles. Here's the real reason I want to do this. This is the case that I think is legit. It will need the thrust cut, and then I'll need to trim down this bearing to fit wherever that thrust lands. Exactly what we need to do on Wheezy. So we'll get a practice on there. See where I'm going with this? This case needs to be decked. So does Wheezy. We'll practice on Wheezy. I want to do all of the Hoover mods. One of the sketchiest Hoover mods is right here. We use a long drill bit and drill through all of those galleys and into this area and drill down from here to intersect those two holes, and that allows us to get more oil from this galley here around the cam bearing for on number 3 into the lifter galley. That gets more oil out to the head. So it's an important mod, and I think we barely have room. Now, different cases are a little different in this area. This is where it really gets sketchy, especially on the single relief cases like these. But this is an H case, and Wheezy is an H case. So we'll try it on this one, see if we get away with it. And if we do, we'll try it on this one. It's kind of like a 2-for-1 deal. So the next task here is to see if we can do this. If we mess this up, a lot of that other stuff falls apart. So we need to get this right. Let's try this out. Cross your fingers. It's number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. We're learning some stuff. Let's see how it measures. 1/10,000th of an inch too small. I will take that all day long. Okay, this one will not fit on here right now because we haven't trimmed down the flange. Yeah, just barely snug. All right, that's good. Now, this is a 3rd oversized number 3 bearing without the flanges, of course. Yep, that looks about right. That's going to be good. Oh, that's so cool. We're going to do number 3 with this guy. Just kind of making it up as we go here. We'll be pulling those flanges off. There you go. That's the right fit. That felt good. I do not have the number 2 main bearing. I got number 4 here. Feels the same. Oh, this is so cool. Okay folks, we got one. Too bad it's a junk case, but this sure is a confidence builder. Next big thing is to put a crankshaft in it and see if it spins. But first we have to modify some bearings. Cue the banjo music. This dowel pin hole is a mess. Instead of trying to do a big one or something like that, that's too messed up. I'm just going to do it over here. I'll mark it and drill the hole on this side. It would be like this with the dowel pin hole in the other case half, of course. So we have an oil hole that's up here on the other case half, and an oil hole down there that's on this case half. If I take this and turn it around exactly as if there was a dowel pin hole right there, we end up with an oil hole here and an oil hole down there, just as we had before. I guess the tricky part will be lining up the dowel pin hole when I'm putting the case together, because the bearing's going to be on the crank in the other half. The oil hole in the case doesn't line up with anything except for this channel, so we don't have to line that up with a hole in the bearing. We only need to make sure that this lines up with the channel. The diameter of that is bigger than the width of this channel, so we'll mark where that comes in and open up the oil channel a little bit in that spot, blend it in so oil won't hit the edge of this, and hopefully it'll flow a little bit better. That's just good practice. It's not going to save this case, but this is why we're doing it. We could use one of these stepped dowel pins that are made for exactly this situation, but where's the fun in that? Free tuition right here. This is the bearing we want to use. It's a little banged up, which makes it perfect for this project. We're going to trim about 4/1000 off of this flange. I think this is going to be accurate for us. Let's give it a shot. This really needs to go well because I don't have another bearing, and that would kind of violate the idea of not spending money on this somewhat hopeless engine. Okay, now we are up to 91 thousandths. That is within 2 or 3 thousandths of our target. I think I'm going to go ahead and pull this out and see what it feels like on the case. Too snug, but it's close. We want to take another 1/1000th off. Man, that cut looks good. I'll take it. The fit is still too snug, but what I realized is I have not deburred the edges after all of the cutting that was done. So let's get that out of the picture and see where we are. This is just worn out superfine sandpaper, just around the edge a little bit. We're going to take down just a tiny bit more. We are set up for a third time. I need to be really careful with this one because I really just want to take a little tiny sliver off. I would be happy with less than 1/1000th of an inch here. We're just trying to scrape some dust off, and we'll see how it goes. Here's the evidence that I cut. I see no evidence with my measurements. That's how much I cut off, which is what I would have expected a few tenths to look like. So I'm going to trust what I'm seeing here, risk having to set it up another time, and just go see how this feels. Okay, I think we finally have it. I have chucked this thing into the lathe at least 10 times. I was on the right side of this by being overly conservative because I haven't gone too far. The problem with that, other than the time and frustration, is more opportunities to screw up the bearing. With practice, I imagine I'll get better at that. I think this one is good to go, but right now what I'd like to do is this. I want to get the number 3 bearing hack job complete. So I'm going to chuck this in the lathe, face off the 2 flanges, and then we'll be able to bed the crank into the case and see if the thing will spin. This is getting kind of exciting. And there you have it. One customized, compromised number 3 main bearing that used to be a number 1 main bearing. So for comparison, we can see we don't have quite as much surface there on either side supporting this bearing and holding oil pressure in. But we did get it the same width, and this one happens to have the right undersize and oversized dimensions. So it's going to fit our case, and it's going to fit this crank that we've decided, I'm sorry, the rod launcher that we've decided to use. Now let's get this into the case and see if it actually spins. Wow, that's cool. This is fairly heavy oil. It's 15W40, but everything feels smooth. There's no binding. It doesn't move sideways like it did before. That's good. We have not set end play, so that doesn't count. But this is great. Bunch of goofy things we're doing here, but our crank spins freely. Click this video now to see our biggest upgrade ever to Haptic Garage. We're going big and getting home, and excited to share it with you. We'll see you in the next video.